Welcome to Ladies Who Jazz, where each month I interview and feature a different female jazz musician. Today we have the amazing Tiffany Chang, who plays the drums. Tiffany, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for making the trip.
Absolutely, anytime. You started out as a classical pianist, and then as a teenager you switched to jazz drums. What made you change directions, and how has your classical foundation influenced your jazz playing?
That's a great question. Well, I was born into a musical family. My mother is a piano teacher, so I started playing the piano at a very young age, at about the age of 3. And as much as I loved classical music, and I do think it gave me a very good foundation in theory and in just the discipline of practicing, I think towards, when I became about 13 or 14, I decided that I wanted to explore other traditions. And part of it was that I had started picking up the drums at church pretty casually. And after that, I decided I wanted to take more formal lessons. And the best teacher in town was a jazz drummer. So I started taking lessons with him and found out that I really loved playing the drums. And what I loved about jazz in particular was that it was such a communal and collective experience. I remember spending so many hours in the practice room alone with my piano, and as much as that was, very enriching in its own way, I think I really craved that collectivity. But I do think that having learned piano was a good decision. Having had that foundation, I think as a drummer it's still important to have a foundation in theory and to be able to hear harmony and melody and the way that those interact. I think it really does affect your playing as a drummer as well.
Who are your top 3 jazz influences?
I think my very first influence was probably Max Roach. I picked up, my first jazz record ever was Clifford Brown and Max Roach. And I was really struck by how melodically Max Roach played. Later on, I was also very much influenced by Ed Blackwell, who kind of took Max Roach's melodic approach to the drums and infused it with this sort of African rhythmic foundation, which, of course, comes from his time living in Africa. And of course, you can't forget Elvin Jones, like his whole approach and the way that he sort of liberated the role of the drummer in the band is definitely something that I think no jazz drummer can really get away from in terms of influencing.
What do you think is happening in jazz right now that excites you?
The fact that nobody really knows what jazz is.
Totally.
That it has so transcended what most people would conceive of as jazz, would define as jazz, and in my opinion, that is what jazz is supposed to do. It is supposed to kind of continually challenge itself. I'm excited by the fact that people are sort of looking outwards for influences. I've seen so many permutations of jazz playing that have absorbed influences from all over the world, from Brazil, from India, from even the Balkans. And I think that's a really exciting thing because that is what's happening in our world right now, is that there is this continual exchange of ideas that is sometimes very challenging and constructive at the same time, as well as this sort of exchange of ideas and influences, and there are basically no barriers. And I think that's extremely exciting.
I know you've played the whole spectrum of jazz, from straight ahead to experimental avant-garde. What do you find compelling about being on both sides of the jazz world? And do you consider yourself more comfortable or at home on one or the other?
I found myself at one point when I was, I think, in college, when all I could listen to was Art Blakey and Max Roach and Elvin, of course the Coltrane Quartet, Miles' Second Quintet. But when I would go out to see music, it was, Satoshi Takeshi, Tony Malaby, Ralph Alessi, and I found that one sort of informed the other in a way. And so in terms of comfort, I think that my personal mode of expression is more towards sort of the freer spectrum, but I'm always practicing bebop. I'm always practicing my ride beat, because I think that it makes its way into the free playing as well, that the same vocabulary, the same techniques are applicable. And in terms of comfort, I think it totally depends on how you're feeling, who you're playing with, and I think it's the same mindset regardless of what kind of jazz you're playing. The goal is always to approach things in a different way and in a fresh way.
Have you faced any challenges doing what you do or to continue what you do, and how have you overcome them?
I think it takes a lot of self-reflection, and particularly in New York City, I think the biggest challenge is giving yourself the time and the space to be creative. So many times I think musicians are caught up in the act of being a musician that the practice of creating music kind of gets shoved to the side. And they're two different things. One is more administrative, hustling for gigs, booking rehearsals. That is very important, and you definitely have to be on top of your game in terms of the professional aspect. But I think particularly in a city where there is so much going on at once, it can be hard to just be still and allow yourself to practice, allow yourself to make mistakes, and to compose, to create, and to find your inner voice, and let that come out. The practice of knowing what you're trying to express and then putting it down on paper, or recording it, or even expressing it to someone you're playing with on the bandstand, that can be really challenging. For myself, I think I'm at the stage where I'm more interested in finding my compositional voice and my compositional process. I've always loved to practice, and that's never been an issue in terms of just like spending time with my drums. There's nothing that I like more than that. But letting the creative flow come out and document my creative ideas, that's the next phase, I think, in my artistic development.
What are you currently focused in your practice right now?
I think, again, just trying to disassociate myself with what I'm supposed to play and just letting myself play. Play what I hear, and also to just trust my own playing.
What are you doing presently, and what do you have coming up?
I think I'm planning to devote the next month just to composition. As I mentioned to you, I'm moving to DC.
Just for the summer, though.
Just for the summer. I will be back. But yeah, just focusing on composition. I also am hoping to get more into production and trying to incorporate more electronics into my music. I've been listening to a lot of hip-hop for the past few years, and I've always loved it, and I've only, like, just in the past couple years started to really study it. And so some of those influences, including the sort of the production side, have kind of piqued my interest, and I want to explore that as well. One thing that I love about playing quote-unquote free music is that it challenges you to think outside of the traditional roles of the instruments, and as a result, you discover all these really unique sound variations, these unique textures and shapes and colors that you create with your instrument, not only by yourself on your own instrument, but also with other instrumentalists as well. So I feel like I have a lot of interesting things in my ear I want to use in my composition.
You've done some work as an activist in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Can you talk about your work, and does music play any role in it?
Absolutely. My personal belief is that, and I do think that most artists have some kind of idea, even if they have never put it down on paper or stated it explicitly, but I think every artist has an idea of what the role of art is. That sort of normative perception of what the goal of the arts is and what the role of the artist is in society, I think plays out in their everyday life. And I think for me, like, art is an act of performative citizenship. When you create something, you're basically making a statement. I'm here, this is what I think, this is who I am. And when you invite an audience to share in that, that is a social and collective experience. So for myself, as an Asian American, jazz, hip hop, whatever, drummer, I found that you kind of have to create your own space. And I think the same goes for anyone in society. And something that I really was cognizant of as an Asian female drummer was how few of us there are. And the challenges that I faced trying to make a space for myself sort of inspired me to look at issues that face the Asian American community. I was very fortunate to have grown up in the Bay Area because there are so many of us there. We never had this conception of being otherized, except maybe in the media. I mean, we perceive that. But on a social level, there was nothing that we couldn't do. For me, my activism as an Asian American woman, as well as like my activism on behalf of like Black and Brown communities, low-income communities of color. I think it's all an interconnected struggle. And I think artists have a huge role to play in that. And so my goal eventually is to be able to use arts not only as a tool for activism, to shed light on the social issues that face our communities, but also to use arts as an activism, as a form of advocacy for the arts themselves and artists themselves.
Can you please share a musical concept that you think is useful for players to have?
I know tons of people have said this, but time. And time not just in like the metronomic sense, but time as in the elastic sense, in the way that it shapes space, not being afraid to play with that and stretch yourself within that. And that's something that I continually work on. My mentor, Billy Drummond, he used to tell me that once you get your ride beat down, everything else falls in place. So I'm just always practicing that. I used to sit in my practice room at NYU, and I would put the metronome on like 40, and I would just practice quarter notes on 40 BPM. And I would like sit in the dark and just practice these like insanely slow tempos, and people would come in and think I'm crazy, which is not too far off. But I found that the space in between those beats is where everything happens, and like kind of being able to feel that's something that that's really helpful, allowing for that space.
What advice do you have for the girls and ladies out there who would like to start playing jazz?
Do it, first of all. And also, although like the scene is getting better, I do think that like many sort of male-dominated sectors or industries, there are going to be challenges, but something that that Jen Shu once told me, she gave me this amazing advice, which was focus on the music, focus on your craft, and try to be yourself under all circumstances. I think that's the main thing, is just to focus and to be confident and to not be afraid to make mistakes.
What is your favorite food?
Sweet potatoes. I lived in Taiwan for a year, and they have these convenience stores called Family Mart, Chunjia, and you can literally go in there and there'll be these little ovens with like baked sweet potatoes in them. So I used to just go into the convenience store and walk out with like a sweet potato in a bag.
That's awesome.
And that was my favorite thing. It was like 25 cents.
Well, I think it's time for us to get ready to play a tune. For the audience out there, if you've enjoyed this interview and would like to see other ladies who jazz, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and don't forget to like this video. If you are a lady who plays jazz or know of someone who does and would like to see them featured on this show, please drop me a line here or on my website, lisaluguitar.com. I'm Lisa Liu. This is Tiffany Chang. Keep shedding.